So there we are. We're standing over this mold. It's made of wood, and we've got iron ready to go. And we'd put a bunch of ceramic oxides in the mold. And I tip the ladle. Iron comes out over the lip, drops down to the mold. There's a deafening explosion. And then there's a crater in the ground. And that was it. And I look up at Jeremy, and he is holding his chest, and a piece of the mold had hit him.
Howdy, folks. Welcome to the podcast Iron. My name is Laura Mullen Vermilia, and on this podcast, I interview members of the cast iron art community in order to inspire, educate, and spread ideas about iron casting and cast iron art. Today, I have the extreme honor to interview Andrew Marsh. Andrew is a 30-year iron casting artist and founder of Lucky 7 Arts, LLC at Building 15 Studios in Louisville, Kentucky. As an artist, Andrew uses metal, wood, and cast iron as well as performance in his artistic practice to create beautiful, explosive, and terrifying works that explore concepts of sacrifice and reward in the face of severe chronic pain. Andrew is the chair of the board of directors and executive officer for Josephine Sculpture Park in Frankfort, Kentucky, as well as being a senior advisor and contributing artist for Sculpture Trails Outdoor Museum in Salisbury, Indiana. Personally, I have had the pleasure to work under Andrew's leadership when he was the chair for the National Conference on Contemporary Cast Iron Art and Practices in 2017 and in 2019, which of course is at Sloss National Historic Landmark in Birmingham, Alabama. I can't forget to mention that he is a former artist in residence at the City Museum in St. Louis, Missouri, and currently he is the Assistant Director of Kahn Center for Renewable Energy Research and the Program Officer for the Lee Ann Kahn Prize for Renewable Energy at the University of Louisville. I'm aware that many of you listening already know Andrew, but if you do not, I'm excited for you to get a chance to know him now through this interview. So Andrew, thank you so much for giving me your time and letting me interview you. And for all of you listening or watching, thanks so much for tuning in, and please enjoy.
Thank you, Laura. I'm really honored to be on your show.
Let's start kind of at the very, very beginning. I really like hearing a lot about artists' kind of initial tendencies that they had as children and maybe how that kind of manifested as they grew into their artistic career. And so
yeah, thanks, Laura. The things that stay with me from that time, probably two very important concepts. One is my dad was a builder, and not just a house builder, but we built geodesic domes. And so moving around, putting dome houses up, always brought a lot of questions like, what is this? And so there was a lot of disbelief that this structure was even possible, even though it was this beautiful mathematically proven thing. So having that experience of repetition and iterations of variations on forms and how you can take a concept and then move through that in a lot of different ways to suit certain moods or expressions is something that I still draw upon. So that was a really important part of my childhood. I think sort of a sideline to that is that because I had to move like almost every 6 months as a kid, like I've never met a stranger. So that part of my personality aids my work, and it makes me more likely to collaborate and that kind of thing, and be someone who's excited about working with other people because that's where I come from. The second part of my youth is that's still with me, or I feel very strongly about, is music. And so I played music from a very young age, and played piano and chimes, and then timpanis and orchestral music, and performed in high school orchestras and things like that, and the Louisville Youth Orchestra. And about that time, I also really lost interest in that kind of compositional music and performance. and just dove into punk rock and metal. And so I was doing a lot of that kind of playing and finding my voice as a musician, and kind of capitalizing on my own story, my own experiences, and the traumas that come with life, or for me anyway, and giving form to that. So before I ever really started making visual art, I was channeling that aggression, that rage, that outrage at the way that our society is, that we're, how we are subjugated in all the ways that we are, and uh, try to give that voice. So as I moved into university, I found Jack Ron and as a mentor, and Jack recognized that because that is also part of his expressive talent. We're both drummers, so the tendency to want to beat on things is kind of something that we shared. And he also recognized the pain and discord that was in me, and my struggle to try and do something with that wasn't self-destructive. And that is probably the biggest gift that Jack ever gave me. Was he just said, look, Marsh, whatever it is you are, man, that's what you need to make work about. And he said, you're already doing it in your music, and now, just let it loose on some steel. So that was incredibly formative to me, and significant in terms of the way that I approach material and narrative and the ideas that I choose to focus on, and my position on them, because it's not a punk kind of ethos all the time. I have a lot of sensitivity in what I'm trying to do, and I start from a point of outrage, but I'm also trying to see that as a gift rather than a curse. So those are the types of things that I find myself looking at, contrasts and balances, and all of that in terms of narrative, in terms of the ideas I'm working through, and then definitely in terms of the material and the way that I work with that. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that.
So that brings us right to BFA under Jack Gron. And because one of the things that I'm doing along with, well, part of what I'm doing with documenting all of these kind of life journeys is kind of documenting also the universities and the names of the people that you studied under, just to get that. I mean, I know that Gabe Akagawa does a great job with the Foundry Tree. But I also like to kind of get some more information from each person individually. So that was at University of Kentucky.
Correct. Yes.
With Jack Ron
and Gary Bibbs. And yeah, and that was, I started there in 89 and finished in 95, and took a couple of years off, was running around touring and playing music and that kind of thing. So that was an incredible life experience that helped me understand that I could go make other people's dreams come true, or I could focus on my own. And I could do both, actually. And so have a career that's one thing, and then have that enable my ability to make art and find freedom in what I choose to make.
And that's something that I personally am also kind of figuring out right now. So I really relate when you say that, because I think a lot of people, as I was in school and exposed to artists and career artists, they were all academics. And that's great. That's beautiful. They have their own gift, but it wasn't until much later actually going to SLOS and meeting, just to drop a name, Aaron Hussey. And I said, well, where do you teach at? And he said, well, I don't teach. I'm a professional sculptor. And that blew my mind. And then later I had a chance to tour his studio. And so I think that people like you are really, really important in our community to show kind of the, because it is very, very heavily academically based, and to show that you can have a career, and then also still do your art on the side and be a prolific sculptor as you are. So
Right on. Well, thank you.
So this is, I'm assuming, the first time that you were introduced to iron casting was in undergrad?
Yes, that's correct. A student of Charles Hook's, a guy named Scott Oberlink. Charles taught at FSU, Florida State. And Scott came to the University of Kentucky for grad school and had already been in this amazing iron experience with Charles. And so as he came into the grad program, that was part of the gift that he brought, was an understanding of sand molding and of iron processes, furnaces, that kind of thing. And then just the difference in kind of the, I don't know, it's the enthusiasm really, for this type of work, as opposed to bronze and aluminum casting, which seemed relatively mundane by comparison. And so he came in, had a great charge, and fired a whole bunch of us up. And your first podcast interviewee, Jim Wade, was one of those people. And Jim and I were both in that program at the same time. And so that was terribly exciting to have this new way of a new metal that we could work with, but really a process that was dynamic and something new to explore.
And also, I feel it's very interesting because I'm just now kind of realizing, because I think of Jack Braun as, because he was the NCC IAP keynote, right, for 2019.
In 2017, that's right.
Oh, yes, 2017. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so interesting to me because I feel like all of these people that have come before me have just known iron forever. And so I just did you stay and get exposed to more? That was so that he came and visited?
No, he came to grad school. Scott came to grad school.
Did you have overlap for a while with him? Because it sounded like Jim Wade didn't really.
No, Jim finished a year before me, and so, but Scott and I worked together on a big bronze casting project for an artist named John Tuska. And we use sand molding to work with Tuska's waxes and translate those into bronze, which are now on the facade of the Fine Arts Building at the University of Kentucky. That was installed in 94, I think, and or 96, maybe somewhere around in there. But so Scott and I really became close. What Jack realized about this process is the same thing that you've realized, and probably the reason why you're doing this podcast in the first place. It is engaging. It engages people, and it also is polarizing in a way, because some people get really fired up about it and other people get real turned off by it. And it's it's not a difficult process. It just requires effort, and all sculpture requires effort. And there's every reason not to make sculpture, and cast iron art especially. And so for those with the fortitude and maybe a little bit of stubbornness and all of the things that make us all such wonderful people, that is a very satisfying way to work, or can be. So Jack realized that. Then Jack started making a furnace based on the Cliff Prokop drawings that he received from Wayne Potratz and Tom Geip. And so I helped Jack build that furnace. And then we had our first iron pour at UK in 1995. And Wayne and Tom and another artist named Jim Schwartz, the three amigos, came to UK, and we poured iron for the first time out of Hell Pig. So that was the first furnace that I ever built and ran. And then I finished that spring, had a big show, and was off into the world.
I just want to kind of circle back and talk about when you were mentioning about the type of artists that are kind of drawn toward how iron is polarizing. But yeah, there is something I totally agree with you about. Those of us that are drawn to it, perhaps it's it's gritty. It's a certain type of effort that you have to be willing to. It's physical. You have to be a team player many, many times, because you can do it alone, but there's reasons why we have conferences and we drive across the country to do so. But yeah, just when you started talking about that, I felt it in my core. Like there's this that Jack and all of us felt is, yeah. So
it is true. And I'll add to that and say, making metal art requires that kind of fortitude, and so iron is one of those really interesting ways of making that kind of focuses that, and it requires a lot more effort than if you're just going to weld things in steel, and a lot more teamwork, and so it kind of pushes that aspect of being a sculptor, which is really different than being a painter or drawer, that type of artist. And that shared kind of communal labor, at least in the academic setting, becomes something that is really powerful, bonds people together, and perhaps plants a seed in them that will continue on through their life, that allows them access mentally to a process and a material where they can speak. Because after all, that is what this is about.
I love that. I love it so much. So that puts us, you out of BFA and into the world. I don't remember exactly the timeline. Do you go right into grad school, or are you casting or sculpting on the side? Or
so after undergrad, I went to work in an architectural ironworks in Lexington, Kentucky, where UK is, and then relocated to Washington, D.C., and was doing public events for a company there for a while. Had a White House access for being a sound tech, and worked for Janet Reno and Colin Powell and a bunch of other, heads of state. Bill Clinton was president at the time. So this is around 96, beginning of 96. And I had a Toyota Land Cruiser, FJ40 in 1977. That was just a total pile. And it had gotten me to DC, but it needed a lot of help. And there was a Toyota Land Cruiser repair shop in kind of the west side of DC. And so a very good friend of mine, it became a very good friend, James Asti, ran that company. And he and I became fast friends. And I basically told him he needed to hire me because his metal work was terrible. And so I went in and started fabricating custom trucks and doing custom metal work and expedition class fabrications. And that was how I made my living in DC after events. So the events were terribly fun, but they're incredibly time consuming. So this was a great way to have a shop to work in. So I was able to make sculptures and then rebuild my truck, which I did, and built a stainless steel truck, and then make a bunch of money, which was super cool. It was right around the time of Jesse James and Monster Garage. And so that whole culture of like tricking out bikes, but doing the same thing for trucks, that was where we were making our money. So I did that until 98, and then went to grad school at Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, and with Tom Geip, who was my mentor there.
well, that's okay. So that's really interesting. And actually, I thought of something that is kind of related when you were talking about then the welding, and just talking when you were talking about how the iron provides different opportunities to artists. So iron, as opposed to bronze and aluminum, iron is weldable to steel. And so that gives you another transition avenue. I mean, this is just kind of me riffing, but that's one thing that, I guess you can. It's not structural. I understand that. Don't come for me. Listeners, don't come for me, because I know iron and steel not structural to weld together. But yeah. So that brings us to SIUE.
Mm-hmm. And you're right. The point that I'll kind of take from what you just said is that iron provides opportunity, and that was what I saw. And so coming to visual art from musical composition and performance, and then also concert production, sound and lighting and that kind of thing, I started looking at iron as a system, in the same way that a stage set is trucked in and erected in several hours, and then a band comes out and rocks it out, and then you pack it all up and take it away. And so my graduate thesis combined that aspect of production not a production casting, but a theatrical or musical production with what I was considering to be high performance metalworking. And that was all the stuff from the trucks. And so I was taking that and putting it together into what I felt was high performance iron. And so that was what my thesis was all about. And I had the opportunity to work with an incredible artist, a number of really incredible artists during grad school. Tom was an amazing mentor, and I cannot express enough, especially now that I can't talk to him anymore, just how much he means to me to this day, and the gifts that he gave me as a lifelong practitioner of all the metal. He was a caster and a fabricator and a blacksmith, and he showed me so many things. I mean, all of my mentors really did that, and each in their own very unique and beautiful way. So working with Tom was outstanding and just what I needed as a wild punk rock fiend and, kind of out of control. And here's a man who's very much in control, and his work is about being in control. And so I had taken that on kind of through the architectural ironworks and then through the trucks and other concert and lighting, metal fabrication, that kind of stuff. There's no like slopping it together like it's some, piece of sculpture or something. These things have to work and they have to not kill people. So that became a really strong part of my building ethic, if you will. At the same time that I was working with Tom, I was working with Matt Toole, who was also in grad school at SIU, who's a year ahead of me. Matt and I collaborated for 2 years, the last 2 years of his 3-year term and the first 2 years of mine, on a dozen different performances. And Matt had been a student of George Beasley at Georgia State University. Matt and I both worked on several projects of George's, the Millennium Project in Scotland, and we did an Iron After Goldsworthy performance at SIU and a couple others. But it was kind of like having these two graduate mentors with Tom and then having access to George, and because George was totally excited that I was excited, and that was one of my favorite things about working with him. So I'm just totally grateful for those interactions. And that shaped what I did in terms of this high performance iron, because I was building hardware to make performances work. And that's what I did for George. And that's what I did with Matt. And then for my own Devil's Night Ironworks, that's what that is a performance art, like a ritual space, almost like a church or something like that, So, but it's made to be photographed and documented and highlight the human interaction and create this beautiful contrast between fire and humans, and then the machines that we're using as pieces of art themselves. So I was throwing all kinds of stuff in there, it was all my work is really about this fusion, of many different enthusiasms and interests and that kind of thing. So I tend to work a lot from experiences that I've had. I've always looked at them as they're, and I say experiences like building or driving trucks or, whatever it may be, playing music, that is all in me and that it's all going to come out somehow. And I trust that as an artist. And I think that's really important to do that. Grad school gave me the opportunity to invest in myself for 3 years and let a version of that come out. And it was, that was really magical. And it just made more possibilities seem like they could happen.
I love all these stories so much. And so I kind of want to know, I don't know, any specifics that you remember about any specific iron pour stories from grad school or anything, because you've been really great about talking about the theory and why you love iron casting. And I think that is something that's really important for these interviews to capture kind of like the magic behind it, what draws us to this artistic medium. But also I love this, like a specific, I mean, you drew us in at the beginning with a story.
We'll come back to that.
But that's not until much later. And so I didn't know if we could maybe just spend a little bit of time in the grad school space and what you were experiencing or making, or like maybe tell us about a specific performance iron pour.
I've got a really good one. Yeah. So when I was in grad school with Tom, Matt Toole was also a student, as we were talking about. And I remember after I got to school, and Matt and I immediately hit it off and started riffing on this ferromatic machine that he had produced that it pours metal into a ladle and then lifts it up and then dumps it, and it goes through a cone and down a trough and into, blows up. And I mean, it was this really great kind of Rube Goldberg sort of an interpretation of how to use iron as a catalyst for a performance, right? Well, he'd had some problems with it. And so that's where he and I immediately started working together, as he was telling me about it. And he showed me a video, and, here's what happened. It froze up here. And so we start problem solving, well, how many times did you transfer metal out of the furnace and then into another ladle and then to this other ladle? And then by the time you picked it up here, it lost 400 degrees and it wasn't going anywhere. It turned into pudding. So we were coming up with things like that. Tom kind of pulled me aside one day. We went to lunch, and he told me the story about Matt's first year at grad school. Matt had carved this big log, and he had poured iron into it during a performance. And when you pour into wood, it doesn't really matter how cured or dried out it is or anything. Wood holds water. That's its core function as a straw, to move water from the ground out to solar cells on the end of this branch. So there's always water in wood. Matt poured this iron in, kabloom, it went everywhere, blew up. And all these people were watching. They were too close. Matt hadn't taken the time to put people back. And a bunch of people got small burns, not like badly burned or anything. And so then Matt and Tom are running around putting people out, and there's smoke coming off of people's clothes and stuff. And Matt was being Matt and being really kind of cheek about it, and trying to keep the mood light and all that kind of stuff. Well, Tom really didn't play that. And he pulled Matt aside and not too quietly said, if you're going to put everyone in all this danger, there's got to be a point, buddy. You can't just blow stuff up and then have nothing at the end of it. He didn't have any casting, no nothing. And so that really stuck in my mind, that I didn't have to experience that firsthand reaming that Matt did, but I was able to learn from a risk that Matt had taken, a very bold one, and one that I respect a lot, but it was also a very hardcore teachable moment. And I immediately realized the value of that. And that has propelled my use of iron ever since as a performance medium, where a casting is the product. Those two things always have to be in balance. So, and that was kind of the way grad school was. Matt would do some crazy stuff, and Tom would get mad, and he'd be in the doghouse for a little while, and Matt, I love you, buddy, and I'm so glad we got to do that together. So, nothing but love.
I'll interview him next, and he'll have a chance for a rebuttal on you on that.
Oh yeah, I mean, please, by all means. Matt and I really learned a lot from each other, and I give him as much, if not more, credit for the quality of thinking that I was coming to during grad school, because he and I were the ones in the shop spending our time figuring out what we were doing, why we were doing it, having those kind of conversations, and then just hours and hours of work, which was one of the really nice things about going to grad school at Edwardsville. Was St. Louis was close, but it took effort to get there. So you're in this little small kind of farm town, and you can just focus. And so I really turned myself inside out for 3 years during grad school to do that and build 3 different furnace performance platforms before I finally got to the point where I built Devil's Night in the way that I wanted it. So it went through a bunch of different iterations, and like all performance things that I had worked on, like a truck, you build something up, you take it out and go trail riding for the weekend, you beat it up, and you make it work, and you see how it holds up, and then if it broke some way, then that's the next thing you work on. And so I was using that same iterative approach to the system of fabrication that was going into these performance ironworks. And then once the performances were done, that was my sculptural object. Those are my sculptures, were these furnaces and platforms and all these weird steel molds where I was catching like bottom drops and stuff like that, And so I made molds that fit Kevin Shunn's. He had a teapot furnace. I made a mold that fit that. So the furnace sat on top of the mold, and I caught the bottom drop and the slagger output. That became a sculpture. I built a mold for Hell Pig at UK, and all during grad school. And then for another probably 12 or 13 years after that, I went to the UK Iron Port every year. And that was a major part of my continued research. So Jack was gracious enough to let me do that. And then Jerry Massey and Jim Wade and Jeremy Colbert and those guys continued to enable me, basically. So,
But what a gift that story was, what a gift that was, that you were able to learn from Matt's mistake. And then also it's still such a great part of your artistic practice now.
And so the real point of that is, I get to work with Matt, and he's doing things and I'm learning stuff, and I'm doing things and he's learning stuff. And that became this really nice symbiotic relationship and a creative collaboration. It taught me a ton about collaborating with people, which I had really taken on well, because I'd been collaborating with a boss who ran the truck shop and with clients who wanted different things. And so I finally, was just like, wait a minute, this is, I don't have to come in and be some superstar artist. I can just come in and do what I do, which is like talk with people and figure out what we want to do together, and then do it. Right. All of this is a way of saying that I had no idea what to do with casting. And I'll take you back to undergrad for just a second. I loved pouring metal. But I didn't know what to do with it. We'd done standard investment. We'd done all of this work for Tusca with sand molds, and we didn't have ceramic shell at the time, but I'd done that at Phil Hutzelman's in Georgia. He's got Inferno Foundry down there. And I just didn't care. It was like working with glass or clay or something like that. It's this very fragile thing with all of these intermittent states where at any time you could lose the piece. And I don't know if you could tell this about me, but I'm not incredibly patient. And so I need things that will respond to being hit with hammers and being set on fire or thrown or knocked over and, pounded into submission. I mean, it's basically just like a drummer attacks a pile of metal. And that was how I was making sculpture at that time. So, all of these like really sort of pinkies out kind of processes, no disrespect, but they just didn't suit me. But man, I love poured metal. And so that was one of those moments where I was just like, well, I don't know what to do with this yet, but I'm just going to keep following my happiness here. And like, I know that I connect with this on a level that like registers really deep, that this is incredibly fun. I love the gear. I love seeing liquid metal and controlling it and all of that kind of stuff. Right. But I just didn't care about the forms. So while I was in grad school, I'd figured out a way to interact with iron that wasn't actually making any sand molds. And in fact, after making we made 50,000 pounds of molds for Tusca. I mean, it was ridiculous. So I was done with sand molds. I was like, if I'm paying for grad school, then there will not be a single sand mold made. And that has largely remained true in the 20 years since. So I really have no patience for that type of process. I mean, I understand it. I can counsel people through it, and I've taught it and all of that. I just don't use it. And I don't think of objects that translate that way. So part of my challenge was, as a fabricator, how do I interact with this process and this energy that I was finding in a whole social aspect of it, and then how do I make that into a thing where I'm satisfying some part of my creative process and I'm engaging with my fellow artists in a way that feels meaningful. And so after so at the end of grad school, I did 2 pours in one day to honor Tom's last pour, because this was his retirement pour. Basically, he retired as soon as I finished grad school. So we did a pour in the morning at SIU. Then I had Devil's Night set up over in St. Louis at Limp Brewery, and we did a Devil's Night performance pour outside of Inform 6, which was a big exhibition in the outside of one of the galleries down at the Limp. And I invited artists from all over the country. And so David LaBelle came from New Mexico, and Durant Thompson came from Mississippi. And I mean, just these people came in from all over the place. I had friends coming down from Minnesota, and they were all people I had worked with all through grad school on their furnaces, and road trip out and go pour metal at Herman, Minnesota, and out at Convergence Festival in Rhode Island. So during grad school, I ran probably 50 different furnaces as I was doing my research to figure out what I wanted my furnace to be. And so then I built it, and this was kind of culmination. So that was, and Matt did a really nice piece for that, where he carved these 2 wood chimneys and then poured into those. And so it was really awesome to have found kinship with all of these people all over the country, and then to be able to draw them together and have them respond in a way that was really positive, and just say, what is it you want to do? You can bring a mold. You can bring some insane thing that we'll put metal in. David Hill from Minnesota, artist from Minnesota, came down with his guitar and amp, and Jeff Hoger, an artist who now lives out in Idaho, came to SIU and spent about 45 minutes taking a piece of pipe and hammering it into a didgeridoo that he then played during this entire thing. So he and David were kind of the musical interlude and made all this crazy sort of whale song, soundscape kind of stuff. And then I had microphones all over the foundry that were run through effects loops and lighting and all that kind of stuff. So I was, it's like the Iron Circus and turning it into a rock show. So that was really amazing to work at that scale and that level of production, and see that through from the time that I started. And then 3 years later, to have followed and believed in this happiness, and just followed these ideas and seen their potential, and then done the work to make all of the parts that would make it all real. So that piece, Devil's Night, is now installed at Sculpture Trails Outdoor Museum. So if anybody's interested in that. But that was a really transformative idea for me, was taking that fabrication and all of those parts and casting and using them together.
And also to help other people achieve their dreams and their artistic visions.
Right. So that has continued. And you asked about City Museum. And that was the next chapter. Was I finished grad school, and then Noah Kirby, who was teaching at WashU, still teaches at WashU, and runs 6 Mile Sculpture Works. Noah was working for Bob Castley at City Museum, which is in downtown St. Louis. Anybody who wants to see that, citymuseum.org. And the museum had been going for maybe 4 or 5 years, and they had built the aquarium on the first floor and a couple of other features, Beatnik Bob's and some other things. And the monstrosity playground, which is out in front of this 10-story building, had just started to kind of emerge. And monstrosity is now a 7-story steel playground with fire trucks and airplanes and bulldozers and a 3-story tree house. And I mean, it is an exploratorium for children of all ages. And so I went there, and Noah saw me and was like, dude, get up here. And he introduced me to the main artist. Bob Castley was his name. And just told Bob, you need to hire this guy. And that was on Friday. And Bob's like, great, see you on Monday. And then I was there for 4 years. And just running a welding crew. I was there for a week and kind of took over all of his welder guys. And then he goes, all right, man, bring a crew. Who do you know? And so I hired all of the students that were undergrads at SIU that I'd gone to school with, who were out of school and, waiting tables or didn't have a job or whatever. And so we just descended on City Museum and went wild. And one of my longtime assistants down there, Mary Levi, she's still there, and she runs the Metalheads now. So a lot of that work that is being done currently, she is, that lineage continues. And I'm incredibly proud of that place. I mean, over 1 million people a year see it and experience it. And the impact of that is amazing. As a work of art, it took the same ideas that I was having about creating these precious spaces and creative spaces and creative play space, that kind of stuff, and then made it 7 stories tall. So Devil's Night, I thought, was really ambitious. And, that was pretty good for a grad student, right? In a little shop. And then I go to City Museum and the scale just goes kaboom and blows up, So that was fantastic. That also took collaboration to a completely different level, because I was collaborating with Bob constantly, and then had to collaborate with this, team of like 10 fabricators and translate all of the arm waving. And, I want this pile of stuff up there, and I want kids to be able to climb through the air. And, Bob was this beautiful madman. And so I got to translate that. That was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, was working for him. And I'm sad that he's gone. So, but our legacy continues on, right? With the City Museum now. So I hope people will check that out. Some of my favorite iron pours that I ever did were installing Devil's Night at the base of the monstrosity. So monstrosity has all these different walkways and layers, and I would put Devil's Night down at the very bottom of that, and then would have a band come in and would perform with the band. And you can play the Devil's Night platforms and stuff. They're all percussive. And so I had Jack Grun actually came and played during that Lent Brewery performance, and reggae bands and metal bands and all kinds of stuff. And so we started doing events at City Museum using the Devil's Night ironworks. And so we're pouring iron, and then there are all these people in these layers above looking down. And so it was like we were down in the 9th ring of hell or something like that, So we did some black tie dinners, which was pretty wild. And then 4th of July, one year, I found all of these zinc coated shelves at wire shelves at an apothecary that we cleaned out. And so I made this big sand pit, and then we buried the wire shelves in the sand, and then pulled some of the sand back and poured metal on them. And they made these beautiful green and yellow sparks, and everybody was oohing and on and stuff. And it was just releasing this horrible zinc gas all over the place. And it's just so fun.
We all do stuff like that. And then, yeah, it's just, you're like, oh, a little bit of exposure, it rounds you out as a person.
Just drink some milk. That's all I got to do. So I ran around telling everybody, make sure you drink your milk tonight. So that was a really intense series of performances to do. That 4 years that I was there, we did probably 7 or 8 events. And I was teaching at Webster University at the time, and was teaching Foundry. And so the final assignment was that the students had to participate in Devil's Night with me. So all of my students at Webster got to do that and be kind of on stage, in the middle of City Museum.
That's amazing. What an amazing opportunity for them. And so those of you who are listening might not know, but I currently live in the area that Andrew's talking about. We're in the St. Louis area, and people will still, when I, go around and it kind of comes out that I'm an iron casting artist, people still remember stuff like that. They'll still talk about, I saw that at the City Museum. I feel like I've had someone mention about Lemp Brewery, but it's it's hard because I wasn't in this area at that time. So I think I'll believe them more now because I just didn't know if they were mistaken or if it was true. But the stories I've heard are true.
They sure are. The coolest part about that, and this is something for people who are kind of struggling with like what to do with themselves and how to interface with iron and stuff. Working with Bob was working with someone who would go out and lay down in front of bulldozers to stop buildings from being torn down. He was he was a stone carver, and he was captivated with Louis Sullivan and the entire Chicago School of Architecture and its presence in St. Louis. So since St. Louis is so close to Chicago, there were many buildings built in downtown St. Louis that used these architectural teams. And so that organic ornament that they became so well known for, that led into kind of this arts and crafts sensibility and all of that, Bob was bent on saving it. And what was interesting was, like many large cities, this ornament disappeared during the 50s as everything was covered with white steel and, in an attempt to embrace this kind of lack of ornament of the international style of architecture. So they just covered the stuff over, and then people forgot that it was there. And so he remembered these things from his childhood, and then later in life was flipping buildings and doing that kind of stuff in downtown St. Louis before City Museum, and was accumulating storehouses of these huge warehouses where he would go out, they were going to demo a building, and he would stop them and pay money to be able to hold up the job so they could take down this stuff and store it. And so the City Museum is built with all of that ornament. And that was part of why the museum started, was as a way to document a museum of the city. You know what I mean? So then it turned in, when I got there, I was doing steel. So then, we started getting railroad bridges and airplanes and all of the other stuff that went into the fabric of this whole thing. Became this massive kind of expression of 20th century building and culture. And just because all of these elements were there that he had collected, and now, we were bringing together to make this fantastical kind of place. So what was cool about it, and the point of telling you that, is we weren't asking anyone for permission. And I think that's one thing that I personally was hung up on. Like, I didn't know what kind of work I should make, because you can make work about anything, and that becomes sort of a mind blower that some people can get kind of hung up on. Like, is what I'm doing really important enough? What am I trying to say here? Because if you can say anything, then man, it gets real hard to start, being specific about that kind of stuff. Right. So that was one of the most freeing aspects, was we were working in territory that no one had ever explored. And then the other cool part of that is to see places like Meow Wolf out in Santa Fe pop up, that are built on a similar kind of idea, but with a different sensibility, but embracing this kind of team collaboration and expression and reuse of materials. And so iron has helped me do that in a lot of ways. And then working with steel, I don't ever buy new steel anymore at all. And in fact, the studio itself was built in 1917. It was a foundry that ran until 1978. So building 15 is part of a bigger factory, and I'm all the way down to the place where I work is, based on this idea of repurposing and trying to make sustainable the things that came before us, as they fall into decrepitude and disrepair and that sort of thing. So those things are showing up in my work more and more too.
Just to kind of riff off of what you were expressing, that it is overwhelming. And as a, now I've been out of grad school for 10 years and I still get overwhelmed with I'm going to an iron pour next week. And what do I even want to make my molds of? And to that point where it's like almost not even important. Just Laura, make a mold of something. And I love that. Don't ask permission. Don't worry about if it's perfect or if it's right. Just make, because I am a mold making, I'm a mold making artist. I identify as a mold making artist. And so yeah, I love it's just so inspiring for me to hear somebody like you that I look up to say, it's almost like I needed to hear this right now, even though you didn't know that, but don't ask permission. And also with this podcast, like I didn't ask, nobody asked for this. Like when I started with Jim Wade, I was like, and also nobody's waiting for it. So no matter how long it takes me to edit this, schedule this with you or edit it, nobody's waiting for it. But now I feel like I'm in the rushing tide. But I'm happy and I'm glad I didn't ask anybody's permission. I just went for it. And so those are words, very inspiring words in a multitude of settings. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. You're welcome.
You're at the City Museum, you're doing all these, you're building, but then you had to change your career path.
I did. I got hurt really badly at City Museum. And in addition to being hurt, I kept working. I couldn't stop working. I was, trying to pay bills. And so I worked for another year and a half while I was injured, and then my legs stopped working. So I'd injured my back in 3 places pretty substantially. I didn't break any bones, but I had ruptured discs and a lot of nerve pain, and I was just working through it and taking the meds the docs were telling me. And so I finally reached the point where my legs stopped working and they carried me out. And then I had to figure out, first of all, I had to recover my health to the point where I could do anything. And then I had to figure out what to do next. And so one of the things I realized is that grad school had given me the ability to think. I mean, I already had that, but to understand abstract concepts and then bring them into reality. And in hindsight, this is easy to say now, but it took me a long time to figure that out, that is part of what artistic training does, is it allows you to hone your ability to conceive and then grapple with the problems of bringing that into the real, Okay. So a friend put me in touch with the director of Cancer Center at University of Louisville. And I knew, I was in a wheelchair for a while, and I knew I was going to be able to continue to be a metal worker as my job, my main vocation. And so the director of this cancer center needed someone who could write, to work with non-native English speakers to improve their manuscripts and their grants so that they could get published and funded. So that was the job. And then that gave me time to recover my body, and I finally figured out what to do with iron during this time. And that's probably the most significant. It was significant to recover my body and my health and transition a career, but to see my ideas suddenly make sense in iron was now something incredibly rewarding. I was like, oh, I know what to do. And so I started doing all of these cardboard or box board cut fabrications like you would do for templating steel forms, right? You'd use a thin, almost like cereal box board, template a thing, then go and transfer that onto steel, cut it out, grind it, and then form it, and then fit it and tack it and weld it and all of that. I was making entire pieces out of boxboard and hot glue, and they were hollow. And then I would take that and invest it and then pour metal into it and displace it. And they were trophies for continuing to live. I had, head to toe chronic pain and just electrical insanity all the time. And it was making me crazy. And I'd go to work and be in this room all by myself, looking at these manuscripts and grants and stuff and all this hardcore science, and just trying not to lose my mind because it just hurt so bad all the time. And so I started channeling that into these forms. And so I made 20 of these trophies. So instead of like winged victory or a baseball player or a bowler or something like that, there were skulls and, just a lot of really hardcore dark imagery, things where, backs of heads were blown off and, a lot of suicidal thoughts. And the trauma of that had to go somewhere, because otherwise, the same problem I had when I was a teenager. At this point, I'm like in my 30s. I can't take this energy out on other people. That is not okay in our society. You go to prison and then you're not making any art, right? Or you're making license plates or something. And so that was not going to work. And you can't make art if you're dead. So, that also wasn't going to work, just ending it all. And so I started channeling this all into my work. And then the act of displacing them became this kind of effigy where I could take all of that bad energy, all of this just in some ways it's hard to describe. And some people go their whole lives and never live through this kind of stuff. And I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But the point is we all have things that affect us this way. The frustration, the madness, you know what I'm saying? So you got to put it somewhere. And that's what I was doing. So I cast all of these trophies and then showed them, and some of them were too heavy, and all I could do was just get them home and plunk them down in the driveway. And it wasn't until I got hurt in 2002. I didn't have surgery till 2015. So it was 13 years of enduring this madness, and then trying to figure out like how to be a person and how to be an artist and how to, all these things. Anyway, so Jack's words kept coming back to me, Jack Braun. He's like, whatever it is you are, put that into your work. And I was like, hell yeah. Okay. And this is what saved me, And so then all of a sudden I had objects I was making that were iron. And I was coming at it as a fabricator, as a welder, I was using that way of thinking. And then I unlocked something in my brain, just was like, yes, okay, this is how it's going to go. And everybody's like, damn, I don't even know what you're doing right now. That's kind of crazy, And that was what I needed. And funny thing about those pieces is that you can find them on the website, lucky7arts.com, under Pain Trophies. They start out with this beautiful veneer of advertising, paper and plastic, and the printed inks that make everything on the shelf look so sexy and mouth-watering, right? And so I'm just putting all that stuff together, and the patterns themselves, I was photographing those, and taking advantage of that visual quality. Then you invest it in sand, you pour metal into it, all this big explosion and burns, and terrible toxicness comes out of it. And then it's in iron, and this thing that had this sheen about it, the stylization that we're inundated with every day in terms of advertising and the marketability of our products and all of that kind of stuff, turns into something that looks like it has endured hell, as it's in iron, and there are pockmarks, and there's carbonization, and there's all this distress. And so what I realized is that I'm using this process and I'm echoing my own existence, a baptism by fire. I'm taking the thing that was so precious and pure and shiny and, wonderful, and turning it into something that wasn't. And that was me. So those, autobiographically, those works are very significant in terms of how I finally unlocked how to use iron. And the last one that I made, so the first ones, it took me like 4 or 5 hours each. I'd sit there and glue stuff together and, make a little doodaloo, and it'd have skulls and pill bottles and all this stuff on it. By the time I finished, with the last one, which is the 20th piece, I had gotten up to, several hundred hours of cutting and fabricating. These things had grown. I was stretching the iron out and making them like 3 feet high and same amount of metal. They're incredibly intricate. And the whole process was so that I could sit at my dining room table in a wheelchair and not be carrying and moving around these big, heavy chunks of wood or whatever, my pattern process was going to be. So I just got tired of it, and something made me put some wood in the last one. It had like a mohawk and stuff, and I made this mohawk out of wood. And then when we poured it, the flames that came out of it were bigger than any other thing that I'd ever done. And that unlocked the next thing for me.
So what? Keep on going. Like, I feel like I am an audience member right now and I'm just facilitating, but so what was the next thing?
So the next thing that happened in 2010 was a big ice storm in Louisville, and a big tree fell down in my front yard. I had a chainsaw and was just strong enough that I could use it to cut up. It was a big elm tree. As I'm cutting this thing up, I'm like, mine's working here. Sculpture materials, chainsaw, tool, carve that, right? And I'd done one carving assignment in undergrad, hated it. It was like cast a big block of plaster and then carve it into something pretty. And, it was cool to hit stuff with hammers, but it just wasn't my thing. And so I was just like, ugh, whatever. And so I stopped carving, and everything I was doing was fabrication. Right. So then I'm like, man, I could take a chainsaw to these things and that'd be pretty rad. So I started carving the outsides of these pieces of wood. A tree guy blows by who's like in the neighborhood doing cleanup from this big storm. He stops. Hey man, what are you doing? I was like, well, I'm a sculptor. I was just trying my hand here at, some carving. I'm going to teach myself how to do this. He's like, wow, you want a tree? And I was like, sure. Yeah. What do you mean? And he goes, well, all of the trees that are down right now, our cut lot is full. So we have to pay to put these trees in the dump. And so if I can bring you trees, then that saves me a bunch of money. So I got free wood for like a year from this guy, and then lined up like 4 or 5 other tree guys that were all about the same thing. And they would just call me up. Hey dude, I got a big so-and-so and you want it? A big black walnut. That happened a couple of times. Sometimes it would be a cherry or something like that, a pretty nice, but usually it was kind of like garbage wood that they couldn't sell to the mills or whatever, and really weren't very good for firewood. So they would just bring them and dump them at my place. And this is like in the middle of like a neighborhood in Louisville. So I was carving in my driveway and my neighbors hated it. And this was the other thing that was really, this is a great trick. So every time a neighbor would come over and complain, I would just be like, go pick out a sculpture. And so I won over my entire neighborhood by just giving my work away, and most of the stuff needed to be given away. And I burned a lot of it and, just cut it up into bits and bagged it and got rid of it or whatever, burned it in fire pit in the backyard. But the pieces I was keeping, I was just giving away. And that was how I kind of smoothed things out all around me was, get everybody invested. Right. So that's a really cool trick. If you find yourself making your work at your home and you're impacting with obnoxious noise or welding arc light in the driveway, like I was doing, then sometimes that's a really good way to, create friends. So, and then I became that crazy guy in the neighborhood who was always, making sculpture out in the front yard. So that was a lot of fun. But I went from carving the outside. One day I was carving a piece and there was a fissure through the middle of it. And I made a cut and backed up and the piece just and broke open, which happens. All of this is like storm damaged wood and diseased and no trees that were healthy. I wouldn't take trees that were healthy. It was just like anything that was traumatized. Yeah, bring me that. So this piece cracked open and I was like, oh, it's like a mold. So I realized I could carve the inside of each half and then put it back together and then pour metal into it. And so that was how it started. And that was in 2010 was the first piece I did that way. And over the last 12 years, I think I've cast probably 200 or 300 pieces like that. And those become the starting point for larger steel fabrication. So I'm still thinking, in terms of steel and how all of that kind of works. And one person described it as casting my own found objects. That's an interesting way to think of it. But the cool thing about casting into wood is it is unlike any other texture, and it has a performance aspect when you pour molten metal into a block of fuel, that has water in it, and you get steam and explosions and things like that. All of that, those performances, and then I started creating events around that, but those performances became then synonymous with kind of my inflammation, my pain. But then the contrast of that, if you can't really tell, is like my enthusiasm all the time, even though I'm like, it hurts really bad to be me. I'm always just like, right. And so now I'm finding a way to do that with molds and with iron. And I tried doing it with aluminum one time and it didn't work because the aluminum's not heavy enough. And the wood makes all this gas as it's burning, even if you put like 1200 degree or 1400 degree aluminum in it, it's burning like mad, but aluminum's so light, the gas just pushes it back out and the aluminum hates it. But iron has gravity. It's heavy. And so it can push past all of that and find its way into the form. And then it cools before it destroys the form. So, we pour iron at, 2750 or something like that, right? Iron only has to drop like 300 or 400 degrees, maybe 200 degrees for it to solidify. Still red hot, but it's not liquid. It's not moving. So even though the mold is on fire, to the iron, it's cold and it's leaching heat out of it. And so you plunge into something or you carve a pattern, then you pour iron into it and you get whatever you get. I mean, you get exactly what you carved into it. So I will, I kind of started into that, but I have to preface this by saying this is now the most dangerous way of making iron art that I've ever undertaken with my own work or anyone else's. And I do not suggest people get into this lightly, and have had a number of occasions where I thought I was dead. So we can talk about this, but I don't want anybody to go into it with like, oh yeah, I'm going to go out and get a chainsaw and start doing what Marsh said. Because no.
I was at the Western Conference, I feel like, in Hays, Kansas, and I just saw this man completely all in protective gear, not leathers though, but I'd never seen a chainsaw artist before, I don't think, in my life, in my 23 years or whatever. And you had like the face mask on and you were under a tent and it was like hot as all get out. And you were just going to town carving wood. And at the time, I hadn't been really exposed to performance art or reaction molds all that much because my iron education at the University of Georgia was very structured. And I'm grateful for that. But then I'm also grateful for the exposure that I got much later. And so, yeah, I remember kind of not knowing what then the next day I was going to experience at the performance pour when you and your fellow cohorts poured into those molds. So that's the work that you're currently doing now.
It is. Yes. And, in all honesty, I can't say that there's really a university in this country and probably worldwide that would be okay with its students using chainsaws the way that I do. I mean, it's just the liability is way too high, and so it tracks that you would not have seen this in an academic setting. You know what I mean? And I'm not the first person to do it. I mean, this was a technique that George Beasley used pretty extensively. Matt Toole did a lot of work with chainsaw carved wood. And it was just something that I came to after working with those guys, but after a very long period of time, as a way to recover from steel fabrication injuries. You know, casting and steel work and stuff takes a long time. It's real hard on the body. I could work with a chainsaw for 3 hours and do a lot, right? And then be down for a week. And it would take me a week to get over what I'd done in those 3 hours. And then I could do it again. But the next time I could do it for 4. So that was how I built myself up, was putting myself in kind of a headspace of the physical crisis that I was experiencing, even by chainsawing, which is hard, evil work to do. I was perpetuating my own injury in a certain respect, but I was almost biofeedbacking through the saw into the wood. And so a lot of those forms are really just expressions that come from hurting while I'm working, and so then that gives me something to work with once it's in iron. And so you get this empty, form that's a mold, and you pour metal into it. And because there's water in wood, it blows up and it catches on fire. And it's a really, beautiful exchange of material states. And it, to me, helps me remember that iron is at the core of our planet, and that is central to our existence. You know what I mean? That forms the gravity that holds us to the earth. And so to be able to make work using that material, I mean, a lot of people talk about its significance in the 20th century industrial revolution, and certainly that is a part of the vocabulary. But the way that I'm using it doesn't have anything to do with that. It's primordial, and it's alien in a way, because it is so far removed from where we exist out here on the shell, on the outside of this orb, and inside is this raging inferno. So to be able to extract that and to form it and mold with it in a way where it can be organic, because it is that way. I mean, that's how the castings come out, is there's burn in and there's carbonization and there's a response and the reaction between the soft part of the wood and the rings, which is the difference between winter and the other seasons of growth. All of that gets reflected in what you cast. So that connection to nature and connection to our physical state, for me, is an incredibly powerful tool in my creative vocabulary. Now, the other part of this I haven't really talked about. I mean, I can work out how to carve split open a log and carve the inside of it in my driveway, right? I can do that. But who's going to pour it? And this is not something that, I mean, most academic foundries are real leery of this kind of stuff. Sloss wouldn't even pour, Sloss Metal Arts wouldn't even pour reaction molds underneath the number 2 shed for 20 years. There was too much potential impact to the people that were there, and then also to the historical structure. So our good friend Carl Billingsley usually ran the ECU furnace outside of the shed. And so I got some of these things poured at conferences where people who were like-minded in their experimentation and pyromania could converge. And one of those people who has been, there are many, and I've mentioned several of them. Jim Wade when he was at University of Kentucky, was a great collaborator. Jeremy Colbert, who continues to teach at University of Kentucky, amazing collaborator, and somebody who, just helped me take it into a different realm entirely. But Jerry Massey is probably the person that I have had the longest running collaboration with. And Jerry is, of course, the founding director of Sculpture Trails Outdoor Museum. And he's my brother, and I love him. And I mean, he has basically said yes to my enthusiasm for this kind of work since the first time I showed up at Trails. And as his program has grown and my ideas have grown along with it, it's become part of my continued research, part of the energy that goes along with the cast iron workshops in July, along with a lot of other really fantastic artists who are there all month or come in for a week at a time. All of the intern artists who have come over the past 12 years now. So that has been a place for me to happen. And I am honored and owe this huge debt to all of those people who took part in this. And there's so many of them. And I want you all to know how much I love you. But I mean, because of that, I was able to push what I wanted to do into a place where I haven't seen anybody take it, and at a scale and a complexity, at a level of insanity that seems to be matching the mind in a way. So that was kind of always one of my hangups with these smaller fabricated kind of boxboard pieces, is they weren't evil enough, and so now I'm finally, I feel like this way of working gives me that. And there is that performance that goes along with it, but then there's an object that results. And so I'm still keeping that mandate. You want to be a performance artist, that's fine. You also want to be a sculptor. And so how do you marry those things and keep it from being just, this great moment in time, but nothing really lasting from it other than a photograph or a video or some kind of a capture. Those are valid ways of working. It's just that doesn't suit me. And so I continue to follow my happiness and the things that are important to me. And this gives me a way to take risks in my work and to use this kind of method of innovating in an iterative way. So I'm making small changes every time I make a new mold and seeing how that works and moving slowly, because it scares the hell out of me. And that's actually a creative space that I feel like is appropriate for me. Not everyone is built this way, and that's okay. But that's one of the beauties of iron. It seems like to me is that I get to create a space where I am getting my needs met creatively, and so do you, and so do you, and so do you, and then we get to work together so that each one of us gets what we need, and that's part of that magic, And so there are a lot of places in this country and in other countries where that can occur, and if you are the type of artist who really find yourself drawn to that, then that's a great place to happen and to contribute and to be part of that kind of team energy, but also find a space for your own individuality. So balancing those things is difficult, but it's part of the fun to me anyhow. And so I hope it is for others.
You're a wealth of knowledge and ever eternal fountain of inspiration.
Oh, thank you.
But I just think that we can't cover everything right now. And so I think this is a good time to maybe wrap up this chapter. But you were just talking about trails. So is that's your hot on the horizon coming up?
Yes. Good catch there. So the Fire at Night celebration at the end of the month, the last Saturday of July, is our big kind of to do. And we run usually 4 or 5 iron furnaces all in one day, and do a number of performances and then some production and then a big kind of finale.
I might try and get out there for that. Man.
Yes, please do. That's a big public day. So people from that Greene County and surrounding Bloomington, Indiana region, everyone comes in, and then there are many iron casters from the kind of the surrounding region who will come in as well, and all welcome.
Don't hold me on that, but I might try and see if I can fit it into my schedule, just because I am so close. I'm only a few hours away. Mm-hmm. So but the last thing that I like to do, or I'm trying to establish this kind of standard with every single one of my guests, since we're going to end it here today, is your advice. Do you have just some advice for anybody that's casting, someone that's, I'm just going to stop prompting and just say, give us some advice.
Thanks. I hope this is worth taking. But one thing that continues to serve me that I can share with you is fail fast. Take chances. Let that risk be part of your creativity. That is a good thing, but it also comes with the responsibility to understand some of the risk that you're taking. And for anyone who's ever worked on a car or some kind of a performance machine, and you make changes to that machine, it affects its performance, right? And so the method is to make one change at a time so that you can understand the difference that it makes. So you want to change all the spark plugs to a different type, and you don't do that and change the gas that you're running. You do one at a time. So take risks, but do so in a way that is responsible, because if it goes wrong, you can very easily hurt yourself and others. And that hurts. I mean, it physically hurts, but I mean, it's hard on the soul to hurt your friends, And so that is something that I strive not to do, and that does happen. And when that happens, it's not failure. It is an opportunity. And so my advice is really take the risks, do so responsibly, and then learn from what you've done. Don't, it's not a matter of like, oh, wow, so cool, and let's just keep doing the same thing. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot that could be said, I think, on that, but hopefully that's empowering in a way. I mean, that's kind of where I am is, I feel like I continue to push the edge myself to make new forms and create within this aesthetic and with this material. And I'm trying to do so that I don't kill myself and I don't hurt any other people. And I would advise you to do the same, if that's what suits you. Not everybody's built that way. And so maybe that's the last little parting bit of advice is know yourself.
That's a great little distilled essence of advice. Thank you so much. Andrew Marsh, you're my friend. I admire you. I look up to you, but I also find extreme comfort in our friendship. Thank you so much for letting me interview you as one of the first. I mean, this is kind of a new chapter for me. You're one of the first 10 interviews that I've done. And know that I'm starting with people that I feel comfortable with. And so I've got some great different people saying, you should interview this person. You should interview this person. Oh, you should interview that person. And I'm like, but I also have to grow comfortable in this role and be able to keep my heart rate down and not have. And so I'm really grateful that you have given me and the rest of the listeners and viewers your time in this way and for being such a great person to interview and a wealth of knowledge.
Well, thank you. And I see you taking a risk here, and I'm super impressed. And I'm also very appreciative that you are interested in what I've been through and give me a way to communicate that to other people. So thank you for that. And thank you all for listening, and let's go and do likewise,
And with that, folks, we wish you a good night, but Andrew and I are going to go over to the after show, which is available to Patreon subscribers only. So for $1 a month or more, but for a minimum of $1 a month, you get access to this little extra 15 to 20 minutes. It's actually been ending up being more like 30 minutes. So you get more than what I say for your bang for your buck. But at the beginning here, Andrew introduced me to this idea of a cold open. We never got a chance to circle back to that story. And so we're going to do it in the after show. So if you want to hear what we're about to talk about for how this interview started, we'll see you over at the after show. But to everybody else, thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. We'll see you at the next pour. Thank you so much for tuning in. As long as I have known Andrew, he has been a major mentor and amazing friend to me. I was thrilled to get this chance to interview him for the podcast. So Andrew, Thank you so much for your time and energy on this. It was inspiring to hear your journey, and I'm honored to be your sister in this community. If you want to follow Andrew on Instagram, his handle is lucky.7arts. That's lucky.7arts. And you can also visit his website, www.lucky7arts.com. And that's lucky7arts.com. If you like what I'm doing here and want to support the podcast, then go to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/podcastiron, and choose a contribution level that fits within your budget. Of course, we already talked about this during the interview, but Patreon supporters at any level get access to the after show. And this is just an extra 15 to 20, sometimes even 30 minutes with the show's guest. In this episode's after show, Andrew tells us about the hook story that he began the podcast episode with and fills in all of the details. So for as low as $1 a month, you can support the show and get this extra content. And please believe me when I say that even $1 makes a difference when it comes to helping me pay for the hosting and dispersing of these interviews publicly. If you don't have it in your budget to support the podcast on Patreon, I completely understand. And if you want to help anyways, then sharing this podcast with somebody who you think will be interested is a huge help. So anyone that you know in the cast iron art community, or maybe is a sculptor looking to get into cast iron, send them the link because everything helps. And for that, I say thank you so much. If you want to get in touch with me, say you have an idea of somebody that you think I should interview on the podcast, you can email me at thepodcastiron@gmail.com. But that's it for now. Thanks again for listening. I'm sending you all my love always, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you. Bye.